This next speaker, there's people that drove a long ways to hear this man. We talked about the agricultural weather situation this morning. All farmers want to know what the agricultural weather situation is. What's topsoil moisture going to be like during planting season? How long is this drought going to go on? What does the water table look like? What is the Gulf, all the big trends in weather? That's very keenly interested with the farm community all across our region. And this gentleman is from our region. I understand you're a graduate of Penn State University. Eric Finkenbinder. He is the chief meteorologist for ABC 27. He lives on a farm in Perry County, Pennsylvania. This man talks your language when it comes to weather. This will be his 23rd year with ABC 27, and I know for a fact that people have driven a great distance today to hear him speak. So welcome to the program, Eric Finkenbinder.
Thank you very much. Well, good morning, everyone. Great to be down here. Nice travel this morning, and this is just a wonderful turnout and a great opportunity. And for me, I got to learn a little bit more about the climate here in Virginia. I had to do a little bit of research there, but my history, just a quick little background. I did grow up on a very small beef farm. It was originally just a small dairy farm, so I would be the 5th generation, so that means my kids and nephews and nieces will be the 6th generation, so we're kind of proud of it. It's only about 120 acres, but since then, I am one of 5 siblings. I've got 2 other brothers and 2 sisters. We're all sort of kind of involved to some degree. My younger brother, after several different jobs, he's always been wanting to farm full-time. He now farms full-time. This will be his 3rd year, so he now is renting other farms, so about 700 acres, and it's the crop rotation: beans, corn, wheat. And for the beef farm, we still have the beef cattle, dabbling into a little bit of lambs too. We have some Katahdin lambs, but we're Limousin cattle. So I know we're not the big Angus type, but we're Limousin. But anyway, I've got a lot of slides to go through, and I want to just briefly mention that I do get the opportunity to talk agriculture. That was why I got into the business that I am. Growing up, I remember in the summertime in the evening, my dad would listen to the NOAA weather radio, and I would just sit there kind of fascinated. Wow, these guys get to really tell us what the future might be. And I always had that fascination of science and predicting the future. Not always right, but we do the best we can. But this is just some of the on-air opportunities. So a lot of the times when it comes to planting season, harvest season, growing season, it's amazing how very little information people know about agriculture. I could get into some stories, but we're going to keep moving on and just talking more about here the climate in Virginia. That's kind of the big thing. I also want to mention about sort of the trends that we're seeing in hurricanes, and then some other kind of more popular questions that I get when I do some speeches too. So I just had to sneak this in. 2025 it now ranks as the 3rd warmest year on record globally. So when we talk about on record, that's about since the late 1800s. So we're talking about 130 years worth of data. But when you look at all of the warmest years on record globally, from about, 2014, we've been seeing, obviously, there is a global trend. Now you're wondering, well, we've got urbanization and, where's the thermometers located? But at the same time, yeah, there may be some small nuances there. But the ocean waters are warmer too. So when you look at this is a temperature percentile. So you can see, for the most part, most of the oceans, the seas, are anywhere from warmer than average to much warmer than average. The darkest reds, those would be record warmest. Now this is just 2025 that we're looking at. So the oceans, the water, it tends to hold a lot of heat. All right, so we go to January 2026. Obviously, it's been cold around here. For us, it's actually one of our coldest winters that we've had in about 10 years. So it just seems like once every decade, we tend to get something, at least some good winter. This is the longest stretch that we've had snow on the ground since 2011. So it was nice to have a winter for a change. I just circled, of course, where we are here in the Mid-Atlantic. But when you look at other locations, certainly seeing off to the north, above the Arctic Circle there, much warmer than average. And still, the ocean waters are showing warmer than average conditions, or near average. And there's a little bit of hint there of La Nina when you look at that a little bit. But this is actually our 6th warmest January on record. Thinking, how can that be? And at times I get, well, so much for climate change. Look how cold the winter is. Look how much snow we're getting. And yes, we will still get cold, snowy winters. It just doesn't seem to happen as often. So this is a tweet by Ben Noll, a good meteorologist. Greenland. Well, obviously Greenland, it's hot for different reasons right now, right? I'm talking specifically temperature. So the temperature estimated to be 26 degrees above average since December 1st. Normally for us, in a given month, if we are 4 to 6 degrees warmer than average, that is significant. Probably being in one of our top 10 warmest months on record. They are 26 degrees above average. It is really warm. And again, it's hot for many ways, many reasons. So what's happening this year is what we see on the right-hand side. The polar air is getting kind of sloshy. So we got obviously into the cold area. It's the polar vortex. So we've got this polar jet stream. When it's contained, we don't really see much cold air. But what happens is if you just kind of put something on top of a beach ball or something, you just kind of sloshes around. And the question is, which part of the globe is that going to be moving? And obviously it moved over top of us. So January 26th, a stark reminder that, yes, the climate system can sometimes simultaneously deliver very cold weather in one region and extreme heat in the other. Once you get west of the Mississippi, I can tell you Denver is actually one of their, I think the last time I checked, 3rd warmest winter on record. So you could really cut the United States in half. East Coast, colder than average. West Coast, much warmer than average. They're finally starting to get some snow chances there across the Rockies and out towards California. And they are excited about it because they have no snow in places where they typically see snow all winter long. All right, let's start to boil this down a little bit. I want to get more into just the local data. This is an example of what I was doing up in the Harrisburg area, so Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and I'm just featuring a couple of slides. I just want to kind of make sure we're all on the same page here. When I say on record, again, most locations, and the ones that I'll be showing here locally, have been keeping weather data since the late 1800s. So we can say, what, about 130 years worth of data or so? And when we look, these are the top 10 warmest Junes on record. And I like to look at just the last 20 years. I had to make a cutoff point. For me, I've really seen a lot of changes since 2018, but I kind of wanted to stretch it out just a little bit. So we're looking at the last 20 years. So 5 of the 10 of the warmest Junes on record in Harrisburg occurred in the last 20 years. Here we are, warmest on record for July. 7 out of 10 of the warmest Julys on record, and again, that's 130 years, have happened in the last 20 years. So that's kind of just an example. This is what I'm looking at. We're going to take 2 spots. Richmond, we've been keeping records since 1897, and Dale Enterprise since 1893. We're going to first start with Richmond, and we're actually going to be heading the other direction. So right now, 3rd coldest winter on record. Now, it says missing there, 19. When I grabbed this information, we still have 19 days worth of data to go through. So our meteorological winter is December, January, February. So we have to finish February yet, but believe it or not, it's our 3rd coldest so far. Until we get through the next 2 weeks, we'll see what happens. All right, what about the warmest? That's where we start to see more of the trends. So 5 of the top 10 warmest winters in Richmond have occurred in the last 20 years. And I never really know where we can start a trend. You know, if we're only seeing 2 or 3, is that really a trend? But once you get about 50%, I mean, we're looking at about half of our warmest winters on record have just occurred within the last 20 years. We go to spring, about 5 again occurred in the last 20 years. The top 3, anybody remember some of these? Maybe 2024, 2025, was it a warm spring last year? Do you recall that? What about summer? This is more what I want to focus more on because obviously this is the growing season. When you look at the warmest summers on record, here they are. And when we take the average temperature, that would be June, July, August. You take the high temperature of the day, you take the low temperature, you average it out, you do that over 3 months. That's where you get the average temperature. So 6 of the top 10 warmest summers on record, June, July, August, have just occurred in the last 20 years. I thought, let's just look a little bit farther. Let's look deeper down the list. 13 of the top 20 warmest summers on record have just occurred in the last 20 years. I would say this is a trend. You know, we're obviously seeing some warmer summers. Now, what's causing it? All right, let's look at that. These are number of days above 90 degrees, so 90 and above. I decided to do a tally. Let's look at the last 130 years, all right? Let's look at the summers, June, July, August. Let's get every day that year. So, for example, in 2010, we had 60 days, that says nights above 90, that meant to be days, 60 days above 90 degrees. And there's some other ones. So 4 of the 10 occurred in the last 20 years. Not necessarily significant. This seems to be a bit more significant. Okay, number of nights above 70. So we don't cool off at night. We stay above 70 degrees at night. 6 of the top 10 occurred in the last 20 years. So for example, and I wish I had 21 years because for some reason 2005 continuously sticks out in Richmond. If I could just do the last 21 years, we could add 2005 in there. But if you've noticed, we get some of the warmer summers over 50 days, 50 to 60 days of nights that stay above 70 degrees. What about 75? So we're talking extreme. I mean, it's really warm at night. We can still get about 2 weeks worth on some of the records. So 8 of the top 10 of those years that had nights above 75, showing you the number of nights above 75 have occurred in the last 20 years. I point this out because this is very similar to Harrisburg, I've noticed. It's not so much the daytime heat in the summer that's causing these records. It's actually the nighttime warmth that's making our summers warm or perhaps even record warm. So we're just not cooling off at night. A lot of that has to do with the moisture in the air and the humidity. We're trapping a lot of that heat, but that also limits us from getting really deep into the 90s around here. We're in that Gulf Stream. So it's sort of like Florida. The record temperature in Florida, I think, is only like 98. When you get so much humidity in the air, it's really tough. You need that very dry climate to get temperatures in the triple digits, 100 degrees. But all of that moisture that we have, then at night, all of that heat can escape. So it's just stagnant air. Quickly looking at falls, 3 of the top 10 occurred in the last 20 years. That didn't seem all that significant, but when you look at the top 20, 11 of the top 20 warmest falls on record have occurred in the last 20 years. And the warmest years on record. This is pretty significant. So when you take all 12 months, you average the high and low of over all of the days and all of the months, we're seeing 8 of the top 10 in the Richmond area occurring over the last 20 years. And I'm a person too, I would much rather give climate data than a weather forecast. If I came here to give you my best guess of what the growing season would be like, you're probably not gonna call your seed rep and saying, change of plans, I got another idea. Probably not. I think noticing at least some trends on what the growing season is looking like is a little bit more important. My brother, for example, I was talking to him on the way down, and I tend to have this question for him a couple of times a year. So he's been doing no-till for about the last 15 years, cover cropping, especially the last 7, 8 years or so. And just asking him, what is he doing different, knowing the information that I'm providing him? And he said, well, one thing I can tell you is my best corn, my best yields are from the fields that I plant the first week of June. he says, no matter what, it just seems like the last 5 years, my later planting seems to do better. And he's kind of shifted into that. And I think for every farmer, it's just a little different. And we'll get into that because I did talk to an agronomist, just asking him, what he sees in the climate and what, some recommendations that he has. So we'll get into that. Quick look at the rain in Richmond. I didn't really find a correlation. Nothing that really shows that we're doing any sort of wetter than average or drier than average. It's you get wet years or wet summers, you get dry summers. It just seems like it's a pretty good distribution there. So I really couldn't find a correlation. I do have a question, and please just blurt it out. What month in the Richmond area do you think is the wettest? July? All right, so I can't really pull a fast one on you. Back home, normally they think it's sometime in the spring. What about driest? So our wettest is, I think July would be, it's third. I mean, we're talking a few tenths of an inch, but August, technically your wettest month, June and July. So your summer months, on average, are the wetter parts of the year. Now, a lot of that has to do with the downpours. It seems like when it rains a lot. And that's what we've been noticing much across parts of the Harrisburg area too, that our wettest month is now July, which is a shock, which I would have thought it would have been maybe during the hurricane months of September or maybe, in May or April. So here's some climate record takeaways for Richmond. All 4 seasons are showing a warming trend, especially the last 20 years. It just seems more and more when I talk to farmers, it's always more of a challenge. Every growing season, there seems to be that weather part that makes it more challenging. It seems like no growing season is ever the same when it comes to weather too. And summer nights seem to be driving the record hot summers. No clear trend for summer rains, and yes, the falls are also warming. I like to say that September really seems to be an extension of summer. Decembers are an extension of fall. March is an extension of spring. Let's go to Dale Enterprise. And I thought, okay, after we get in Richmond, we obviously see some sort of correlation. Let's check this out. And when we looked at it, warmest winters on record, okay, we got 3. 3 of the warmest winters, one of them being just a few years ago. How about springtime? So we got 2 in the last 20 years, the top 10. So I wouldn't say this is really a big trend. How about summer? Okay, warmest summers on record. And still, we're looking at about 4. I don't know if anybody remembers maybe the more recent one, 2024. So that would have been ranked as the 10th warmest summer on record for Dale Enterprise. Like I said, I like to see at least 5 out of 10 when I start seeing maybe a bit more of a trend. When you look at the top 20 warmest summers on record, just about 7. So, I think there's at least a little bit of a correlation there that we do see some warming of the summer month over the last 20 years. Remember, this is 130 years worth of data. So we look at nights above 70. One thing I've noticed too, not many. We don't get many nights in the Dale Enterprise area above 70. 8, that is the most, and that was actually last summer. I don't know if you guys recall any of that in 2024, 2020. So I thought, okay, instead of showing nights above 75, and I have a feeling too, it has a lot to do with the location and the proximity with the mountains. When I started looking at topography, it kind of looks a little bit more like maybe some cool air kind of drains with ridges on the both sides of Dale Enterprise. Again, I'm sort of learning the area as I go here in Virginia, but nights above 65. We have a little bit maybe there of a trend. 4 of the top 10 occurred in the last 20 years. So what I would say is nights above, or I should say days above 90, I couldn't find any in the last 20 years. Now, on the far right-hand side, that's the number of missing days. I accidentally kept that in there. So some of your warmest summers on record, for example, 99 was very warm for us. You had 50 days above 90 degrees. A warmest falls on record, 1, occurred in the last 20 years. So I don't really see much of a difference here when we're talking summertime and a warming trend. We go to warmest years on record, so just 2 of the top 10 occurred in the last 20 years. In rain, again, it just seems like we get wet summers, we get dry summers. There's nothing really that stands out in this at all, unless you remember the mid-1960s. We've got what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years of very dry conditions. I'm sure we've got some people that maybe do remember the 60s there. But other than that, it just seems like, you get wet months, or you get wet years, growing seasons, and dry growing seasons. I can't fool you on this one if you already know the Richmond one, the wettest month being July at about 4 inches of rain. So, and again, when we do get storms, we get a lot of rain at one time. Even when we do have dry Julys, when you average it all out, it seems like July tends to be our wettest month for Dale Enterprise. So I do think there's more of a climatological balance, and I do believe that is influenced by the Appalachians. And for anyone around this area that wants to talk to me afterwards, I am interested in kind of getting more information. Obviously, I do think your location makes a difference as far as not getting quite as warm as other parts of Virginia. Summer still shows some warming, summer nights being the driving warmth, and no clear trend for the summertime rain. So this is obviously what Ray was talking about, Jim was talking about, very good information, and I like to think that we're just kind of overlapping each other a little bit. I'm only talking about cover crops in relation to excessive summer nights, because that seems to be more of a trend in areas that I've been watching. So yes, it does reduce extreme soil temperature, and maybe this is a question for Ray or Jim, but I would have to think it does at least protect your microbes, your bacteria in that extreme heat stress, especially under the cover crop. And my brother said, well, yeah, the cover crops also absorb rock sweat. And I was like, I'm not going to put that in the slide. I've never heard of rock sweat before. Where we are, it's kind of shaly. And he's like, I had a conversation with the agronomist, and yes, the rocks do sweat. I was like, all right. So for maybe anyone else that is adamant saying, yes, I've heard of rock sweat. So basically, nighttime, as that rock cools, there's some condensation on it, and maybe the cover crop is able to warm that up. I'm not standing behind that, but my brother insists that that is actually something. All right, let's talk about hurricanes. For many years, I would even say even like last year, when we have a dry summer, I always say on air, let's look for the remnants of some tropical systems. Once we can get some tropical activity get fired up, that's going to help us out, especially when we're talking about dry conditions into July and August. We just need that tropical moisture. And our location, I think, relies on it. I know every time you hear about hurricanes in the news, it's always bad news. I try to explain, well, the remnants is often good news in the ag industry that we can get this. And it's not that they're because of climate change and warming conditions, that we're getting bigger, nastier, more hurricanes. If there's one trend that seems to be standing out, it's that they're slowing down, obviously producing more flooding. So here's your science lesson of the day. The arrows in blue, that is your prevailing winds, what we call the westerlies. Okay, so that's where the jet streams are. Everything comes from west to east. And then when you get into yellow arrows, that is your trade winds. So if you notice, when you track hurricanes, if you like tracking hurricanes, we start to see them develop in the Atlantic. They get closer, and then all of a sudden, they go from the trade winds up into the westerlies, and that's why we see a lot of them curving around. Here's what we're noticing in some studies. Those blue arrows basically are, again, our westerlies. The strength of these are weakening where we are, and they're becoming more poleward, meaning, you know how in the summer it gets very stagnant, we don't get much airflow, and the fronts don't even seem cool anymore? We just don't get that colder air. Why are they slowing down? Well, they're saying that because of the researchers found that 4 degrees of warming would cause the westerly, strong currents blowing through the mid-latitudes, which is where we are, to push towards the poles. So we're getting more stagnant. There's really nothing moving air around, and if that's the case, there's nothing really to move these hurricanes any faster, so they're moving slower. That's why we're seeing the tendency of flooding to occur more often. So when we do get this moisture, oftentimes it's going to rain a lot more. We just don't have those winds to kick them out. So I'm now to the point where does tropical moisture help or hurt us? Because if it's slower, and I've also noticed that it's happening later into the season. I am not seeing as many, and this is maybe more focused on the last 5 years or so, because I'm getting so impatient for these tropical systems and they just don't arrive. Last year, I didn't think we saw anything until like September, October. So here is some information. Roughly 60% of tropical activity occurs after September 10th. Is it too late? For a lot of us that have the crops out there. Also transport fungus and pests. We had a tropical system move through, and then a week later, we didn't have any leaves on our alfalfa the one year. So there is a transport of fungus and pests, and then you get the heavy rain during harvest season. This was September 2024, and we had a week stretch of rainy conditions. It was only about 2 inches of rain over that week, but it stayed damp. We never cleared out. It was misty. And the beans were already sprouting in the pods. It was a good year yield-wise, and there were farmers that lost pretty much the entire bean crop from that. So I'm now to the point where it's like, do I even really want to see tropical moisture anymore? If it's coming later, it's kind of too late for a lot of us. So here's some advice from a local agronomist. Good, we got a little bit of time here. Because I asked him, I said, some of the information I provide, what would you suggest? And this was more for our area. He said, yep, the genetics of the corn over the last 5 years improved to adapt heat. He feels that when it's time to plant, we kind of jump into planting a little bit early, that proper seed establishment is far more important. I think my brother can I think he's kind of going with that too. He realizes if I can get better seed establishment and just wait until the soil's warmer, at least his yield is better. And the agronomist said too, he could mention, prescribe something for one farm and the next farm over is something different. So we all have to kind of take this information to what we're doing in our specific farm, and of course with the soil conditions and where you are climate-wise too. Obviously we saw a difference just between Richmond and Dale Enterprise. It seems like humidity, it's the dry air. So when you get the hot, dry air, that's when you really have some stress. It does happen at times. Normally, we have the humid conditions from the Gulf Stream, but it was not that long ago. It was within the last few years. Remember the Canada wildfires? Canada, by the way, 50% of the warmest summers in Canada have just occurred in the last 13 years. Why is that important to us? These cold fronts are not cold fronts anymore. They're kind of cool fronts. When do we get that nice cool down from these fronts anymore, especially in July and August? So if Canada is warmer than, dealing with warm summers, where is our cool air supply in summer? So that's why I feel our summers are a bit more stagnant too. Rain and moisture, when you have a period of very dry conditions and then you get a downpour, which happens a lot, he says you only get about 10% of that to get in the ground. He said most of that runs off. And yes, obviously cover crops can help. So that's really the tough part. When it does rain, what can we do to capture as much moisture as possible before we get that runoff? I see more and more often, especially where we are, it's those 1 inch of rains, we still get them, but then we'll get 2-3 inch reports. We'll get people from a thunderstorm saying they get 2.5-3 inches of rain. That is a lot of rain at one time with a lot of that running off. And a substantial increase in insects over the last several years due to milder winters, obviously not this one, but cold winters could reduce slug population, which we have issues with up there too. So I get 2 questions. I got 3 minutes. Normally when I do Q&A, I get 2 main questions. What's AI going to do for weather forecasting? And what about cloud seeding? So I'm going to quickly talk about both of those very quickly. AI relies heavily on analog forecasting, which means basically they just take storms from historical years and just kind of uses that to implement forecasts. So the more conventional way is using mathematical equations. That's the models we use. AI uses more of a pattern recognition. My question is, if we're seeing a change in climate and they're getting a pattern recognition from stuff that's occurred over the last 100 years or so, is that going to be accurate? It does provide far more efficient. The updates will happen more often. That's the good news. A lot of the model data that we use right now, we only get updates 4 times a day. AI could do it a lot more often. And there's a large-scale accuracy. They do find it useful for tropical systems. I would say for those of us that are much more interested in whether or not the storm's hitting us or the storm's hitting the next town next to us in July, that's more what we want to know. I think AI is far, far away. What I am noticing is I think AI is going to allow easier access to weather information. I'm still a little hesitant in saying that it's going to provide more accurate. We do have some AI forecast model guidance right now. It's not something that I weigh my forecast very heavily on, but just something to keep in mind. We'll see what happens over time, but I would say the accuracy, not there yet, but certainly the availability of maybe some information you need would be there. All right, and lastly, cloud seeding, because I get a lot of questions about this. It's in the news a lot. First, you have to have the ingredients in place. It can't be sunny, blue sky, and we try to get something out there to make it rain. That's not going to happen. A lot of the times, this is used in the Western US. And by the way, in order to get a raindrop, this goes back to cloud physics. In order to get a raindrop to actually form, you need dust particles. So what happens is those dust particles in the air help to form the raindrops, then we get moisture to fall down. So it's really just putting dust particles in the air. If they were to do that during a storm, we might be able to increase rain by about 10%. This has been used more in the Western US, where 10% is a big deal because they just don't get much rain. Around here, I don't really think it's going to be something that's going to be used that often. We'll see what happens moving forward because, again, we can't do this when it's sunny and 75. So hopefully that's some information I can provide you. And again, I'm just about 30 seconds here. I'm more than happy to answer questions, but at the same time, I am going to stick around. So if you have some more questions that you want to ask afterwards, I'll be more than happy to. But I think we do have time for some Q&A.
I hope so.
Okay.
Yeah, good.
And this picture is probably about 10 years old.
How about a round of applause for Eric? Farmers love talking about the weather, don't we? Can I be selfish and I ask a question?
Sure.
When can I plant tomatoes in Mount Sidney, Virginia in April? No, no, I do have one question. I think this will be a question that will be of broad interest across this room. I get a lot of questions as an agricultural journalist about drought. And the general public will approach me and say, Ish, we got puddles. I'm walking through puddles. There's snow piles all over the parking lots. How can we be in a drought? How do you define drought?
Oh, how do I define drought? That's not my decision to make. There's official drought criteria, but we've been dealing with drought conditions, and I would say around here too since last summer, right? So it's been, yeah. When you take the snow that we had, which for us was a powdery snow, and you melt that all down, it was maybe a ½ inch to an inch. And that's probably the most moisture that we've had in months for some of us. And how much of that is actually going down into the ground? How much of that actually ran off if the ground was frozen beforehand? So there's certain drought criteria that's more of, for us, DEP, the Department of Environmental Protection, but obviously we're dealing with a deficit from last summer, and I don't see a quick turnaround. If I was to provide any sort of weather forecast, I don't think we're going to all of a sudden move into a wet period. We obviously do see some rain chances moving forward, but it's a little bit here and there.
What I'm hearing in the Mid-Atlantic region, a dry spring might not be out of the question.
It's certainly possible. There's a lot of research too when we're starting to talk about the growing season and droughts, and then you're talking about heavy rains. It seems like when you get in these drought periods, they last longer, but these heavy rain events and these droughts almost butt up against each other. So it is dry, 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 and then when it rains a lot, and it pours. I've also noticed the trend where once we start to see storms form in the summer, I'll start to see them develop, and every summer's different. One year, maybe Hershey will get, and then the next year it's closer to Harrisburg. But it just seems like once we start to see the large-scale weather patterns set up, there is going to be areas that are more favorable for thunderstorms that year, and other areas that are not far away that tend to get missed. So that does change a little bit from summer to summer, but there are some areas that are consistently getting those storms more than my farm. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And we do have time for one question from the audience. The microphones are out there. Do you have a question for Eric? about the weather situation? Anything you're observing? Front row, rear, here.
Where's Dale Enterprises?
Where's Dale Enterprise? I can answer that. It's about 4 miles to the west of here.
Okay.
And the only reason, instead of Harrisonburg being the meteorological place of record, Dale Enterprise, ever since the Civil War, was the home of a meteorologist, and he recorded all the records at his home at Dale Enterprise. So Dale Enterprise is Harrisonburg, Central Shenandoah Valley.
There probably is weather data for Harrisonburg, but it doesn't go back probably over 100 years. It might be the last 50 years or so. So in order to get a larger range of weather data, Dale Enterprise was the closest.
Thank you, Eric.
Yep, thank you.